The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Shona Rochefort. I'm from CRM Dynamics, and I'd like to welcome those of you who are here to the seminar, the presentation today on basics in CRM Dynamics 365. So let me just move on to the next screen. I'm just going to wait 1 or 2 minutes to see if anyone else is joining, and we'll just start in a moment. Okay, I've got a comment that someone doesn't have sound. Can anyone confirm if they do hear me? I did check with our team beforehand who said they did. Yeah, Lada, it may be on your side that you're not, don't have a speaker, headset or whatever on there. Okay, that's great. Okay, so maybe we'll start from here. As I say, my name is Shona Rochefort. I'm one of the consultants with CRM Dynamics, and have a couple of colleagues on the line as well. So we're here to help you with any questions that you may have during the presentation. Please feel free to enter your questions. One of my colleagues, Glenn, is on the line and will help as we go along. If we find there's any questions at the end, then please hang on and we'll try and go through everything as we go through. Now, the presentation today is back to basics. Now, I would like to say right up front that I really am trying to make this a little bit back, really back to basics in terms of giving some of the things that may get missed when people first learn CRM Dynamics. So if you find that this is just maybe a little bit too basic for you, I do apologize for you, but others do benefit from these kind of things sometimes. So please just kind of hang on there in that respect, and we will help in future webinars maybe to do something that's of more interest to you. So what we're looking at is not getting into too much depth on these things, but sort of accessing CRM. How do you do that? What's the best way? Some of the basic terminology, looking at the first main screen in terms of what's that, all that stuff that's at the top and all that stuff at the bottom. Looking at some of the personal options you can set, and then maybe looking at some of the ribbon bars. And then at the end, I'm kind of throwing in a couple of things that you may not be able to do. You may not even have access to do it, but just to make you aware that these are some of the things that perhaps are available from the system when you start using it. So I'm just going to, if you don't mind, come out of here in terms of the system. Can you confirm, maybe one of my gang, that you have the access to CRM on the screen now? Can someone just confirm that you're seeing my CRM system?
I can see it fine, Shona.
Thank you. That's great. Thanks very much. Okay, so first thing, I'm in this system now, but one of the questions that we get asked, two questions we get asked a lot: which browser should I use, first of all, and what's the best way to access it? Now, the presentation I'm doing this morning is online. What we call the system is online. That means that it's hosted by Microsoft in the cloud. There's basically a couple of ways you can access from that perspective. I would say I think the simplest one is for you just to use a direct link into the system. And on here, you will get a direct link that basically looks a little bit like this in the menu bar. What I'm going to do is just show you how I access that through a different browser that I'm using. I'm using Chrome this morning. What we have found in our experience is that every browser there is has a limitation on something to do with Dynamics. Generally speaking, and I absolutely stress generally, I think most people say Chrome is the one they prefer, but that doesn't mean to say that if you're having a good experience with another browser, that's absolutely fine as well. Some of the browsers we find are a little bit limited in some of the things that they allow you to do. Other browsers have different limitations. So my recommendation is to find the one that you like using and stick with it, and just go from there. So let me open an internet browser here. I'm going to just open IE for the moment, and I'm going to paste in my path. And you can see that on this one, we've just got a test one that's set up. And what will happen here is that it tells me that I'm, let's just go into a private browsing. Sorry, we go into a number, so it always looks like it's trying to find something else. So what you will end up with here is that you will be able to see on this basis the login screen that you can access from this point with your password. So I'm just going to find the password that I have here to be able to use this one, and I'm going to have a username which I'm going to paste in, and this is the standard screen that you will see, and then you can do a next one, and then I'm going to just paste in my password that has been set up for here. And you'll see that it will hide it, and you can show it if you need to, and then you click sign in. Now it also has a kind of neat feature here as well, is that if you're using a standard app login on the basis here, every time you're coming in with the same one, it's asking you if you want to basically don't show this again and just really just keep your password defined. I would recommend that you do that the next time that you log in. It may not ask you for your password. Now, a lot of that kind of functionality depends sometimes on your Office procedures as well. It could also be that your Office has set you up with a direct link into the system and has already set up the information that's necessary for you to log in. So sometimes companies do that to help employees, especially if there's a large number. You've got maybe an intranet with something that you access all your applications on. But if you're just going on independently, then you can go from here as well. Now, you can also go through your Office 365 login as well and choose the app that you want to do in terms of being able to access information on that basis. If you want to access on that assumption, then there's no problem. You can do that as well. Now I'm going to continue. I'm just going to close the actual internet one, and I'm going to continue using Chrome. You'll also see on this one, for example, I have Sandbox written at the top. This allows me to be able to see easily that I'm not in my production system. So if, for example, I was doing some testing or whatever, you need to make sure you're in the Sandbox environment before you start with your work, just in case you actually affect the stuff that you're doing on production as well, which you do not want to do. So just to cover a couple of basics as well. Terminology that we use. I mean, CRM is basically one big database. A database is made up of separate areas of data that come together in different collections of different types of data. We call these areas the entities. So the entities are things like accounts, contacts, cases, things like this, where you're gathering like information together. Entities can be associated to each other, so a company can have contacts, that kind of thing, but the basic entity structure is under your main entity. Within each entity, you will have a record of data. So the record, for the intents of mostly what you're looking at, is that you are looking at a record which will be entered on a specific form. But the record is basically the collection of individual data about one specific record. So a company could be its name, address, telephone number, email, fax, that kind of thing. The fields are all the independent areas of data. So the name is a field, the address is a field, the email is a field, that kind of thing, of all the different information. Now, in terms of looking at that information, Dynamics basically shows you three main areas, and that's views, charts, and dashboards. So for example, if I was to look at my account information here, and I would point out at this point, this is a standard Microsoft test data, so there's nothing specific about it in terms of actual information. This is a view. A view is basically a collection of data that is shown on a main screen and demonstrates what you are visually looking at in terms of what you have defined the fields and the filters to be. So for example, on this one, your view is showing 5 fields of data. Doesn't mean to say that's the only 5 fields. It just shows 5 fields. And the definition of what you're looking at is my active accounts. So from the perspective of Microsoft, this is saying the accounts which you own. Now, when you get into using this, and your administrators, but also yourselves as well, can set up your own views, and you can set up system views, and they can be defined in whatever way you want. One of the important things to remember when you start using Dynamics is that Microsoft helps you a lot by defining a lot of stuff up front. It may not be what you want to see. You may decide that the way Microsoft is displaying something is not how you want to display it, but the flexibility that Microsoft gives you is that they will help you by giving you what they think you want, and then you can continue by creating your own ones as well. Now, the charts, without going necessarily into the functionality of how to create the charts, what the charts are, you can see on the right-hand side, you have a little charts bar. Again, Microsoft gives you some default ones. But basically, a chart is just really a picture of your data. So what the charts will do is take the data that you have defined, which in this case is 10 entries of accounts, and it will display it in the way that the chart has been set up to be activated. So in this case, we have accounts by industry. There's also some, for example, by owner. And of course, this is a really boring set of charts because we're just using the standard test data at the moment. But understanding that you could have something really quite complicated in here that comes up in a pie chart or whatever, that kind of thing. Now, the one step up from there in terms of helping you to see the data is your physical dashboard. And if I just show you an example of, again, of Microsoft's definition, a dashboard is basically allowing you to show sets of information together on one screen. Now you'll see, for example, on this one, we have quite a large number of pieces of data showing. So we have a chart here of the funnel. We have something on what's new with your records. We then have 2 physical charts, 3 physical charts. There's just nothing in this final one. And then we also have a view. So you have a lot of flexibility in what you can show. And the advantage of the dashboards in terms of helping initiate people into using Dynamics is the flexibility of what you can see. So you as a sales rep who's monitoring the accounts that you're visiting over the course of the next few months, what opportunities you have, how they look, how much revenue you anticipate getting, your dashboard's going to look very different potentially from the managing director of the company who needs a fast overview as where money's being made, how many people are lagging in their payments, that kind of thing. So you have the ability to set up different dashboards aimed at different types of people. And this is definitely one of the main flexibility areas of the complete system, is that you can really tailor separate areas to match the people's needs who are looking at them. Okay, so that's kind of the terminology in terms of what are we looking at, what are we actually using this system to show, kind of thing. Now, what about the actual the bits that you always see whenever you log in? So all the stuff up here and all the stuff below. Let's just maximize this screen out to go back in. I'm going to go back into my accounts, and you can see, and let's hide this bar so that it doesn't get in the way. You can see that on this screen, there's a lot of stuff up top. There's a lot of stuff below. Some of it you may never need to use, but some of it may be in the position that you've never actually realized what it can be used for. So that's why I wanted just to go through some of them today. So I mentioned the entities in terms of grouping data together. what Microsoft does is group all this information for you in different kind of buckets. It will also depend on what you've purchased. The main thing that will govern what you see up here is your security access. So for example, if you have admin access, you will see all of this. But if you only have access, let's say, to do accounts and contacts and maybe some cases and leads, because that's your area of operation, you may only see these two app areas, these two definitions. You'll see that under each of these, and if I click one, you'll see it basically gets a little bit bigger, and then it shows me what's underneath on all of these. So you can see that each of these contains different icons to different areas. If I click on one, it will really just take me to that area of that entity, and you'll see that it comes up with a default view to show me that detail. You'll also see that the different areas sometimes contain the same links. So here, for example, under sales, I've got accounts, contacts, leads, and opportunities. Under service, I have accounts and contacts. So there's a commonality between these two areas. And this is because the coverage on the apps for sales crosses over with the kind of information that service people would need as well. So you basically can get given access at a security level to the modules that you actually need in your day-to-day work. So let's go back to looking at our accounts. And you'll see that as I click one of the areas, I kind of have a path growing here. I have little drop-down arrows beside those paths. If I click the drop-down arrows, then basically what we're saying here is that will activate what I'm looking at. Same way with the actual area on here. So I've now got my account. I can enter any information that I need to. If I wanted to go into a record, I could go into a record, and then if I wanted to come back out of that record, what I could do is I see my path has gone down a little bit. I can now go back up the breadcrumbs of the path, and I'm back into my area up here. Now on the right-hand side of the screen, you'll also see there's 6, 7 buttons on here. And these all provide different functions as well. Now, a lot of these buttons over here provide shortcuts for you, but I absolutely stress up front that you don't have to use them. If you prefer to go a different route, that's fine. If you're driving home and you've got to go down a particular road, but it's a square with another set of roads, doesn't matter which one you take, you get to the same place. And some people are going to prefer to take one way, and some people are going to prefer to take the other way. It's exactly the same with this. So if you're doing something one way and you see your colleague doing it a different way, if you're both achieving the same result, doesn't matter which way you go. But I just want to make sure that you're aware of these in case you do find that one of these is shorter than what you're doing. So the little magnifying glass, this basically allows you to search. The difference between searching here and here is that this search only searches this area. So this search will search accounts. It will search all the account information, but it only searches accounts. The one in the top bar, that searches everything across the whole system. So if I search in here and I type, like, for example, coffee, oh, it's not going to find anything. And it's not going to find anything because nothing starts with coffee. I have to remember to put my wildcard in first. So now I've got my wildcard in, it's finding anything that contains the word coffee. So you can see that I have 3 entries across the system. I have an account called Fourth Copy. I have a contact where the company is Fourth Copy, and I have a lead where the company is Fourth Copy. So it's found each of these 3 records, and I can easily see where my information is showing across the whole system, not in just one area. Now, the next one along, this shows me things that I have recently looked at. Now, this is a test environment that basically I've just done for today. So there's not a lot showing on this drop-down list. You can see that's actually why I went into a record so that it showed up on this list. But what this shows me is recent views that I looked in and also recent records. Now, this can be quite helpful if you know, maybe as a salesman, you're working on 5 or 6 accounts, and you're looking at your opportunities and accounts for those 5 or 6 records. Instead of going into each of the accounts and opportunities and leads maybe, and even contacts, going into each of those areas, finding the records that you looked at, even at an individual level. So if I drop accounts, for example, it shows this one. It can then quickly and easily show me everything that I've looked at in the last while, and then I can just choose off this drop-down list. And you'll see that it even matches the little icon. So for example, if I was to go into Yvonne McKay here, and then come back out again, you can see it's taking me into contacts. If I now look at my recent, I've got the company with the little company icon, and I've also got Yvonne's name with a little contact icon as well. So as I say, I can very easily and quickly access this information in terms of where I want to go when I come in. Now, the next button along here is the plus sign. And what the plus sign does is it allows me to add a new record on the fly, in effect. So if I think about my contacts, I can go into contacts, I can click new, and then I create a new record. It takes me into a full form, and I create my record, I save it, I've got lots of data in there, absolutely fine. But if I just want to create one quickly, say I'm on the phone and someone's talking to me and they say, yes, you know, I'm a new person, you've not talked to me before, and you're like, okay, can you just give me your information and I'll just type it in. So if you click new by the plus sign, you'll see that these are all the records where you can just add a quick, rough and ready, sort of dirty version of what you need. So let's look at account. It pops up a quick create screen, and you can see that I can just put the essentials in there, and then I can continue with my conversation on the phone, knowing that after I've come off the phone, then I can find this record and I can go back and enter the rest of the information. Now, the details that show on the quick create, they are by default what Microsoft gives you, but you have the ability to go in and change the fields that you show. So say you're in an organization where when you phone on the account, if you take that information, one of the most essential questions that you're asking is which industry they work in. So your quick create, you may decide you don't need this information, annual revenue, number of employees, don't need that, but I do need what industry they are. Then boom, I can change this form and I can add that information in accordingly and go from there. Okay, so once I've put this information in and I've clicked save, that record is then completely and utterly saved and it's in the system. Just to remind everyone, I'm not sure if you've seen this yet, if you see a little red star here, it means it's mandatory. I cannot save this record until I put that data in. If you see a little blue cross on your screen, let's just make sure there's none on here. I think there may be. No, it looks like we actually don't have one. A little blue cross beside a field means that it's recommended that you fill it in, but you are still able to continue if you don't complete it. That can be quite useful when it's information that you want to alert people to, but you know that realistically, they're not going to know that information on the first time they create the record. Okay, so moving along on here, the next one is the filter. Now, this is when you can really look at your data and understand what the filtering is. Now, I don't want to get into today as to how to do a view and a dashboard, but just to highlight that this is where you would access it from, and you can save whatever you create here as your own personal view. This does not go in as a system view. It only is accessible to you individually, but what it does mean is that you are able to save something, and then later on you can share it with people as well. So you can see from here that it defaulted to what I was looking at as I started. So say I look at this and I think, okay, this is my active contacts, that's great, but what I'd really like to see here is their full address as well. So what I could do is say, right, I've got what I want as a shell, let's go in and enter a few more columns onto this. and I can go through and enter my column information. Then if I save as, that view is now saved and I can access it. And I don't, even though I could go here and access my views from here, I don't have to. If I click on my actual view here, the information will drop down and I can see it at the bottom as well. Here I've got create personal view as well. So this just takes you straight in there and makes it really good. This button is your personal options button. Let me just come back to that just in a moment. I just want to finish off with this row first. This button here is the help area. This can be extremely useful. This takes you into Microsoft's Help Hub, and basically you are then open into their help file system. And this can be, you know, if you type something in, you go away onto the internet and then you're into all sorts of searching. You can, of course, also just open internet browser and type in a search, find all sorts of areas where people have maybe done blogs where they've put information in, that kind of thing. It's very, very easy to do to that kind of area. This one here demonstrates you, who's logged in. You'll see you do have the ability to add a picture. If you want to put in something that identifies you as an individual, and then that would show on different areas of the system as well. But what you will see here is basically the person who's logged in. But that's kind of maybe helpful when you're testing and you're using maybe multiple logins. You just want to check something. It can be quite helpful on that basis as well. Okay, I do see there's a question about the differences between 8 and 9. I'm not going to go into all the bits and pieces. As Glenn has said, there's a blog that you can look at, which is maybe quite helpful on there. But one or two of perhaps the major differences, you'll see that the screen layout is separate. Those of you perhaps new will not necessarily see this, but what Microsoft tried to do in this one is kind of get rid of the white space more, so there weren't except where things are lining up. You see there's a whole lot of white space here, but that's because things are lining up in areas. They've also spaced out things a little bit more. The advantage of that is there's text wrap on here. So now here, for example, you can see preferred method of contact actually wraps. This can be very helpful. I'm sure all of you have gone through trying to widen this column so that it makes it fit in the text. It now wraps. One of the other changes is that you can now have a multi-pick list. So where you had an option set like here, where you have to choose just one, you can now define a field as a multiple pick list, and it basically will allow you to choose multiple options. In terms of really general day-to-day operation, there's not really a vast number of changes. It's more kind of how some of the functionality kind of works in the background, and then, as I say, one or two little things like the field wrap and that kind of stuff. But please feel free to look at the article, and I'm sure that will give a lot more detail on that basis. So let me go back to my contacts here. So that's the top row, and the one that I left was personal options. So let's just look at personal options for a moment. I'm not going to go through absolutely everything, because I think a lot of this is not required for the majority of users, but one or two areas that do look on this basis under the options are at least worth pointing out. So if you choose, let me just show you again, I did that quite quickly. Under here, you'll see the top one here is options. If I click options, you will see the personal options. Now, the important thing to remember here is that this looks very similar to a screen on the system options. This button here only sets things for you as an individual. Doesn't set it for any of your colleagues or any of the system, it's just you. The best page in terms of this, the best two pages, really the ones that affect you, are the first one and the last one. The first one allows you to change some of the way you see things. So the first thing is, which page do you go to when you log on? Now, the default system for this is that you go onto Sales Dashboard. So you go onto the Sales module, and then it takes you to Dashboards. But you can go to any module, and you can go to any of the options within that module. So let's say you are a sales rep and you want to go to opportunities. you can go to sales, opportunities, and then every time you open Dynamics, that'll be the page that it goes to. So that can be quite useful if you are focusing on one area of the system. And going to the dashboards could be quite useful. Going back to my managing director, he might really only want to see the dashboard. So the fact that he opens Dynamics and his dashboard is wham bam there right in front of him, that's exactly what he needs. The next one here is the number of records that you show on a page. So this is on the screen here. How many will you see as you go through? Now, if you tend not to use much data, or you find that you're looking at data in chunks and you want to just kind of focus on particular areas, the default value is 50. And that means that you will see 50 rows on the screen per page. However, if you're somebody that maybe is analyzing data a lot, looking at vast quantities of data, you're probably going to want to see more than that. I tend to always look at the 250, just because if I'm looking at screens of views, it's usually to get information about the areas of data that I'm looking at. But entirely up to you. The default mode in Advanced Find, this just shows how you see the Advanced Find when you open it. Generally speaking, keeping it as simple is fine. The time zone. Now, this may not affect you at all. This may be something, you know, you're working in an office, there's a number of you in that office, you're in one location, everybody's working in the same time zone, no issue whatsoever. You just keep it in the same time zone. But if you're working in multi-time zones, this can start getting very complicated, especially if you're like around the world multi-time zones. So the ability to be able to see your information in your time zone can be extremely helpful in terms of things like, you know, dates that something has to be done, where you need to go in terms of picking up information, you know, that kind of thing. You can change your time zone to whatever time zone is appropriate, and then dates, times, that kind of thing will all show in your time zone. One thing just to bear in mind on that, sometimes if you're doing work around the midnight time, bear in mind that what you see might be the next or the previous day to what someone else sees. If you're working in the UK and someone else is working in Canada, then some of the records may show a different date if they were created towards the end of one person's day. Default currency. This can also be very useful if you are working in a multi-region system. So every system that's set up on CRM has a base currency, the one that the system uses as its currency. And that's going to be, generally speaking, the main currency that's in operation for your company. For Canadian companies, obviously, that's likely to be the Canadian dollar. And what the system does is that everything that's done in a currency, it translates it to that base currency so that you always have something that's on a level pegging and a consistent level. However, if you're entering information and you want it to show in your currency, so you want it to show in the euro, or you want it to show in sterling or whatever, then by entering a different currency, it means that when you enter a currency amount, it shows in your individual currency. Now, obviously, that can start getting a little confusing with multi-currencies, and that's why the base currency can be very helpful. If you put those fields in, everything is always on a level pegging on the system. Excuse me. Really, on that basis, I would say that's all you need to be really concerned about in this. You could put a prefix for your default region country code if you wanted. The other area that may be of help, though, is if you change your your language. The system can use multi-languages. The basic system is translated into multi-languages by Microsoft. So if you do change your interface, it will show the different language. The other area that can help you with that, sorry, I missed this one, is formats. If you want to, and I don't know why this defaults to Mohawk, but if you want to default this to something else for yourself, so the system is in Mohawk, I want to put this to English Canadian, so I go into English Canada, and then this will determine how your entries look here. So for example, if I do this with English Canadian and I actually change it and do it with English UK, which is probably going to be more my inclination, you can see on this that the currency defaults to sterling. You've got a short date changing in its format, that kind of stuff. So again, it kind of makes assumptions for you as to how you will be looking. Generally speaking, a lot of the systems are set to English US and show the default currencies on that basis. So that's your top level. Now, what about your bottom row here? This is one that I think is personally is frequently missed by people. Now, obviously, this is a little bit difficult with only 13 records, but if you imagine that you had 13,000 records in here, which for contacts or companies is entirely realistic, this allows you to fine-tune where you're searching. You'll see that, first of all, you have something that gives you the number of records. This only shows the number of records up to 5,000. If it's more than 5,000, then it goes through from 1 to 5,000 plus, it says. So it says that there's more than 5,000, basically. That can be very annoying if you want to know exactly where you are, perhaps, or how many records you've got. One way is to look at your chart, and some of the charts actually show with a number at the end, so sometimes that can be helpful. A lot of the charts show up to 50,000 as a record. But the other thing that can be quite helpful in getting you somewhere, the column that you sort by, which is in this case full name, you can click to the places in the alphabet which start with what you're typing. So if I look at, for example, go to T, it shows me that I've got one entry, Thomas Anderson. If I went to S, it showed me that I had 4. If I went to G, it shows me I've got nothing in my list of Gs. All will show everything. Number will show the numbers. So say, for example, I go into accounts. Oh, I thought I had an account in here with a number, but I don't. So this one would show me the A's, for example, et cetera, et cetera. So this can be quite useful to take you to a specific place. You know, I've got 13,000 records. I know my record begins with P. Let's go to the P's and see if I can at least find it. And then this number actually becomes how many P's you have. So it will say 1 to 250 of P. Now we've set this to show 250 records, but you know, you may have 50 records. You may have 100 records set. If you do have more than is showing on here, so you'll have 1 to 100 of 300, say, you can move from page to page doing this. Unfortunately, it doesn't have a last button, which I must admit I think would be very useful, but it can take you to the beginning. Other than that, you go through one page at a time. Bear in mind that one way of moving around as well is you could just sort your records by order. So if you've got A to Z and you're going to try and find a Y, then by reversing the order so that your Zs come at the top, then you would be in a position that your Ys were much closer to scroll down to. So that's definitely one area that you can look on from that basis as well. Now, let's look at on the next basis. We've done the top and we've done the bottom. We've got the personal options. Now, what about the ribbon bar in the middle? This also has a whole host of things in it that can be really useful to look at on this basis. So if I look at the ribbon bar either on here or inside even my record as well, you'll see that there are a lot of areas. The first one to make sure that you're aware on here is that when you look at this, if it doesn't all fit on, it has 3 little dots, and there's a whole host more on here as well. So some of them hopefully are self-explanatory, but let me go back to the account screen and show you a couple that maybe you're not aware that are at least available, and what that actually means that you should do. Bulk edit. You'll see that you have an edit button. That's quite useful. You know, you can either click on the record or you can choose the record and you can click edit, and that will take you in. But you can also do a multiple pick list. So what you can do on here is, if I had, sorry about the pop-ups coming up here, if you had 5 records and you wanted to edit them, if you click the edit button here, it will allow you to change the multiple records at the same time. So if all of them had the same phone number, let's say, you could change the phone number on here, to whatever you wanted it to be, and then when you saved it and changed, all of them would change to the same one. I'm not going to do it on this basis. Now, the other one that this is really helpful for is if you want to assign records. So let's say, for example, here we have these 5 records. They're currently sitting with me as the owner, but I don't want these records anymore. I want to assign them to somebody else. I could go through and assign each one individually, or I can click assign, and I can look at who I'm assigning it to, and I can find an individual person that I want to assign it to, and then I can click that person, and it's now assigned to that individual instead of me. So that's a good way of editing a whole bunch of stuff at one time that you may not want to go in and individually do. Now, the other thing you can do as well is that you can actually mass delete things. So for example, here, if I was to actually click on all my records and then click on delete, it gives me the ability to do a bulk delete. So it's telling me that I can delete it, and I can either delete it just in one go, or I can actually do what we call a bulk delete, where I can program it to be deleted. So say I knew I had to do a whole bunch of records to be deleted at a certain time, I can go into, if it actually pops up, I could go into setting my criteria and deleting any number of records at the same time. So say I wanted to delete 10,000 accounts. I could say anything where the account was created before boom. And then because I know that's going to take a long time and it also might interfere with people, I can then click on here and define when I actually want to do that. So maybe I set it, okay, maybe it's now, but I could also set it to maybe do it at night, so that if I did have to do anything, it was going to place the least strain possible on the server. Now, I want to stress though on both of these and other things on here, a lot of these are controlled by security. So your company may decide that they don't want people doing mass deletes. Personally, I always think that's a good idea, because deleting is a very dangerous thing to do, because you can delete related records without realizing it. So you should always limit the number of people who can delete, but especially with setup and when you first go live, things like that, bulk delete can be very helpful. If you've tested something and you want to just maybe get rid of everything that you've tested, then you can do something like that. The other one, again, that is dependent on access, but can at least to be able to know that it exists, is the ability to merge 2 records. So let's say we had 2 records that were created, and everybody in the world has problems with data duplication and not being able to keep their records straight, and they have 2 people or 2 companies created that are basically the same. You will see that you have a button here. When you choose to, you have a button called merge. What that does is it basically lists the 2 records, and it lists all the relevant information about those 2 records. And it says, okay, this is record 1, this is record 2, this is what I'm showing. Which one is the one that's most correct? So the one that's most correct becomes your master. And that's the one that's going to gain most of the stuff. But then you can go through each individual field and say, right, which value is correct for the record that I want to be in the end? So, you've got things like the web, but maybe the number of employees is more accurate here. The address in this whole section is more accurate here, etc., etc., etc. Now, once I've done that and I press OK, what the system does is it takes the winner record, the one that was the master record, and it merges everything from the losing record into that record. Now, not only does it update the fields with the ones that you chose as accurate, but if there are any dependency records attached to it, it will join them to the winning record. So say you had some cases under this one, or you had contacts under this one, they now become under this one. Now, this is a hugely useful tool, but it's also a very powerful tool. Once you've done that, the system records that it's merged and it deactivates this record. So if you make a mistake on this, yes, you can activate the record, but all the things that got moved over here, it might be difficult to work out how to move them back again. So if you're going to do merging, it's very useful to be able to do it. It can really help with your data cleanup because you don't have to go through everything and move everything over and check it. But you do have to be very, very careful with it to make sure that that you're not just giving it to everybody who maybe doesn't understand the implications and how other people are using the system. Activate and deactivate, fairly standard. You can activate a record, then maybe look, if you've got a view here, you've got inactive accounts identified, there's nothing here, you could reactivate a record. You also have the ability to do things like exporting this data to Excel. You can do that off this screen and then either do it online or export it into the static worksheet mode that goes into Excel. Your three buttons here allow you to go into the physical views that you can go into as well. So let's just go into one record. Let's just see if there's anything really exciting on here as well. You have things like the ability to connect, so to show that you can link this record to another. If you have the ability to edit the form, you could do it straight from here. This one is also very useful, email a link. This can be very handy when you're saying to somebody, oh, I've got this record, I can see this company, I need you to update some information, or I need your help in something. Rather than saying to them, here's a screenshot of it, go in and find it. You can't do this link because this link just takes you into the system. Email a link will actually open the email, and it will also, if you're on the main screen, it will allow you to copy the link as well. So let's just go back out to here, and you should have the ability under one of these. You can email a link here, and on this one, you can directly email selected items or the whole view. So this gives you the ability of quickly and efficiently sending something to somebody as well. Let me go back into here and see if there's anything else terribly exciting around here. This links to the process, the business process flow. We don't have one on this one, but if you were to, you can activate it from the bar. And then you will see on here that you have the ability to do things like share records. You can do Word templates from here. So this basically allows you to create a Word document based on the data in here. And you can activate your activities from here as well. So I appreciate I haven't gone into these in full depth, but that gives you a flavor, hopefully, of what's there, and maybe encourages you to investigate and look at some of these yourself as well. Now, the last thing I just wanted to very quickly show you, I know that this is going on, so we want to wrap up soon, but I just wanted to highlight one thing to you that may be of use that linked back to what we were saying on data. Under settings, and usually it's the administrators that only have access to this, but just to at least show you it's here, we have the ability to set duplicate detection rules. So you will see that there are a number that show up on the system, and this basically, you may have seen this when you're using the system. It allows you to say, if something happens with, if a record is entered with the same data, show me that it might be a duplicate. And you'll see that there's lots of definitions already given. Some of these are published. So if a contact has the same business phone number, alert me that it might be a duplicate. If it has the same email address, if it has the same first name and last name. It's not bulletproof, this. You can still have contacts with 2 email addresses that are duplicates. You could still have contacts with the first name, last name that are the same, father and son, maybe. Also, it's a very fine line, and that's partly why I wanted to kind of show you this today. If you make this too rigid, people will keep getting a message saying it's a potential duplicate, and that can make people frustrated. So if you are putting in the duplicate detection rules, please make sure that you do some kind of analysis as to what you actually want to show as a duplicate. So just to finish off and say that under settings, there are also a whole host of other settings that, generally speaking, an administrator would be in control of. It is worth looking at what some of these things do, because you will find that some of them may help your users and yourself in terms of what they're able to do. That is what I would like to say at the moment. If there's any questions, please feel free to ask. I do see that one that we had on the system was, can you show what a multi-list looks like? I was actually just trying to see as I went through if we had something with a multi-pick list in here, and I'm not sure if there's one actually physically set up. Let me just check a case and see if I can find one. But basically what it would show is that when you click on here, there'd be a little kind of cross box here, and you just check whichever ones you want, and then in this field it divides them with a semicolon, and basically just shows them on that basis. So yes, I hate to say this, but I don't think there's any actually set up in here. I don't know, Glenn, if you've come across any on a standard system.
No, I don't know of any offhand.
Yeah, I think, yeah, but basically, yeah, you probably wouldn't get a multi on here. Yeah, I think unfortunately there aren't any specifically set on here, but it really just looks like the drop down, except it's a little bit more spaced out because you can put a checkbox on all of these as well. Okay, so we got another couple. Can one search on all option values? Yes, I think if you set up your view, you would basically set up your view on here. I'm going to kind of assume from your questions that you at least understand a little bit on this, but if you were searching on a field, so say you had a drop down on account and the multi-pick list, you would basically put contains here. And what contains means is that anywhere in the field context, these characters appear. So by putting contains, then you would go from there. And we have a question about developing a custom application step by step, the whole process with it, like creating. In terms of creating your own application, obviously based on the company that I'm with, I would caution against doing all of that by yourself. But if you want to, I think the main area to look at is the Microsoft help files. Basically, Microsoft is doing the whole process with links into different areas. But just quite honestly, play around on the website as well. I mean, we have a Learning Academy area which shows small videos on how to do specific areas. But if you're basically starting totally from scratch and want to go in, yeah, I would start with Microsoft. Heather, in terms of basic workflow or campaign webinar, I think that's one that the workflows we can certainly, I think we've done ones before. If you look at past webinars on our website, there's some, but certainly we can put that forward as a suggestion of topics that we could cover in the future as well. Yeah, absolutely. If you want to change production, do it in Sandbox first. This is something that is an absolute must for anything you do. Basically, whenever you make a change, you want to make sure that that change is valid, not just for what you physically change it for, but to make sure it has no impact on what you're doing. And yes, sometimes people could say, if I'm changing a label, then it doesn't really need to be verified first. Okay, fine. But the other thing is that it does mean your Sandbox and your production are different. If you do it in Sandbox first and then copy that to production through a solution, which is obviously a slightly more administrative area, but if you do that, you also guarantee that your two versions are the same. It's a very common issue with every single company everywhere that your systems get out of sync. People don't realize they're out of sync, and then you start doing modifications on an out of sync one, and you end up getting very messed up. It really is one of those things that it's a pain. I agree to have to do it in Sandbox first sometimes, but in the long run, it totally and utterly pays off. Okay, any other questions? If there's no other questions, I just say thank you very much indeed for your time, and please keep an eye for our future webinars. Thank you very much.